When European settlers came to America, they saw a land rich in natural resources. They looked at the land and saw many things that could be harvested and sent back to Europe to sell and develop markets for. Trees were still in abundance where much of Europe had been logs, so wood for housing, furniture, and tools was in big demand. Tobacco and other native crops quickly became a popular market. Wildlife pelts were in demand for fashionable clothing in Europe. In America, furs were used as everyday clothing and blankets, but in Europe, they were clothing for the wealthy. The Puritans and other groups quickly built communities and divided the land into ownership, high ranking persons, or royalty. What they overlooked was the fact that Native American cultures had communities that communicated and traded with each other and had established governments and ways of life that were very sustainable. They had a rich history of sustainability and well managed care of those resources. Hi, I'm Amy. Welcome to my channel where I create content on organic gardening, wildlife, and sustainability. Everything that we do as humans affects the environment in some shape or form. Some things, like mining, make extensive detrimental changes. Well, many different Native American cultures lived in very different geographic areas in what would become the United States. They had a common collective wisdom. They recognized and understood that all parts of an ecosystem are connected, that humans, animals, plants, and even rocks were dependent upon each other for survival and the well being of the ecological niche they lived in. This fundamental belief put the indigenous humans on equal footing with the animals they hunted for food or the berries they took from the bush. They understood their lives made an impact because of this knowledge. They treated nature with a level of respect and admiration that is often dismissed in modern cultures. Native Americans did change their ecological niches to some extent. They cleared areas for houses and fields. These changes were on a small scale, and when the tribe moved to a new location, the land reclaimed itself in a short time. Archaeological digs find remnants of their communities, but those places did not damage the environment for the long term. This way of working with nature brought them into a great deal of conflict with white settlers. As white settlers invaded America, they had different views of land management. The early groups, such as the Pilgrims, viewed the land as something to be conquered. The concept of land ownership was strange and different to indigenous cultures, where settlers felt they had purchased the land and it was theirs to do what they wanted with. We are fortunate that many early settlers could write and that many of their writings are still intact so we can learn how they felt. They often express fear of this strange new world and its inhabitants, not just the people, but the wildlife, in their diaries and letters. By the way, I have an article on this which contains links to studies and documents that you may find interesting. Not that there was always conflict. The early settlers benefited from learning from the tribes they met. The first Thanksgiving is a painting by American painter Jean Louis Jerome Ferris. While the painting is quite fanciful and not necessarily realistic, it is a compelling tribute to the peace and camaraderie of that early feast. So, what made Native American culture so sustainable? Well, their spiritual and cultural lifestyle was very different. The concept of self restraint comes from the existence of communal living, in addition to living in a natural world that may bring unexpected changes. The practice of self restraint benefits a communal society where the strength in the community equates with survival. Indigenous people have lived with this philosophy for thousands of years. The early Puritans did try a more collective way of raising and gathering food as a means of early survival. However, that soon faded because they had experiences from a more capitalistic society that they brought with them. Instead of trading goods, They wanted to be able to sell goods. The Iroquois Confederacy had a philosophy that you may have heard of, the seventh generation, which mandates that tribal decisions are made considering the effects of their actions and decisions for descendants 7 generations into the future. If you live in a small town, you may understand this level of accountability. Small town discipline often rides on the "I'll tell your mother" philosophy, which honestly works very well. I've seen that play out in small courtrooms and classrooms in my own hometown. The Iroquois Confederacy government dates back in written form to 1142 AD and was admired by Benjamin Franklin, who based parts of the Constitution on its practices. This system is about relationships, human, animal, and environmental relationships that affect the quality of our lives and for future generations. Another method of sustainability is how people provide food for themselves. Often, when people think about Native American people getting food, they think of the plains cultures and something like this George Catlin painting. However, the tribes that the first settlers encountered along the eastern coast were farmers. Spirituality also greatly influenced growing food. Prayers and offerings of gratitude were expressed to the three sisters in order to show appreciation and thankfulness for the crops. I have a video on the three sisters gardening method that was employed by many of the tribes in the eastern coast areas. Many cultures had well developed sustainable agriculture techniques and were proficient in growing crops for large numbers of people. The Cherokee were raising a minimum of 15 varieties of maize before European settlements that they had bred and were cultivating. Some of these sustainable techniques we know from the stories surrounding Tisquanto, such as adding fish to the soil for nutrients. And as an organic farmer today, I'm still doing that. Another technique the Wampanoag taught the early settlers was to spread wood ashes on the garden to add nutrients. Permaculture and regenerative agriculture are farming methods that have gotten popular today, and they seek to focus on being natural and holistic and use sustainable practices. One of my fondest memories is going foraging with my great grandmother and learning all the plants and herbs in the woods. Foraging is a great way to get in touch with nature and add to our food stores by gathering plants in the wild. I have several foraging videos. When we look for wild foods, we can appreciate all that nature provides for us and the hard work that went into providing substance for all members of a group. Indigenous groups teach us that when we forage, we don't delete the crop. We harvest up to a third of the crop and allow the rest to continue to grow and reproduce. This ensures that there will be plenty for future generations and for wildlife and for the next foraging trip. Foraging was an important skill among Native Americans as well as American colonists. Not only did it provide food and seasonal ingredients, but medicine for sickness. Iroquois records show us that over 80 wild foods were gathered. Hunting and fishing were important ways to add protein to the diet. Using all parts of the animal harvested was important. Waste was not an option. Making sustainability part of our lifestyle, Native American tribes often have celebrations to honor the harvest, those for growing crops and hunting. Native American communities have a long standing history of living in harmony with the natural world. Their sustainable practices, deeply rooted in a profound respect for the earth and its resources, offer valuable lessons for us to incorporate into our modern society. As we learn from the Iroquois Confederacy, Native Americans have understood that our actions on the earth affect generations. The ancestors relied solely on what the land freely gave them, and we must honor that relationship. Check out the article in the description. Wishing you a restful and reflective holiday, and thank you for watching.